Okay, you're all set.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I want to open this meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee for Tuesday, May 27th, 2025 at 10 a.m. I'm going to do just a brief roll call, starting with our members. Doug Rose.
Here.
Gary Beller.
Here.
Joanna Roach.
Here.
Rachel Freeman.
Here.
Liz Phelps.
Here.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
Okay, and then staff. Leah Hill.
Here.
Vince Murphy.
Here.
Holly Backus.
Present.
Libby Gibson.
Here.
And Brian Turbot.
In attendance.
Okay, great.
Peter, I'm here too, Dave Iverson.
Hey, Dave. Sorry.
That's all right.
You're right in the middle of my screen. I'm like, what am I looking at?
And Matt
Oh,
Fee
and-
just came on too.
And Matt Fee. Okay. I'm going to read our little script. Good morning. This meeting is being audio and video recorded. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you, and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all devices and phones. For items with public comment, after committee members have finished their discussion on an agenda item, the chair will afford members of the public up to 3 minutes to speak. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their name and any affiliations. To give public comment, you must be recognized by the chair and speak through the chair. There's to be no crosstalk with others in attendance. In the interest in the efficient use of our time, please speak through the chair. To be recognized for making public comment, use the raised hand feature by clicking on the reaction tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then click on the raise hand button. When you've finished your comment, please click the lower hand button. It's important for me to note that TRAC isn't required by law to take public comment. We do so because we need your invaluable input. We view public input as a privilege, so please remain respectful in your comments and do not disparage other speakers or members of this committee. Okay. First item on the agenda is public comment on any subject that is not on our agenda. Is there anybody, any members of the public that have public comments not related to this agenda? Okay, seeing none. Next item is the approval of the minutes, May 13th, 2025. Do we have minutes?
You do.
Okay. Everybody get a chance to read them?
I'll move approval. It's Matt.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, Matt needs approval. Gary seconds. Roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Doug Rose.
Aye.
Joanna Roach.
Aye.
Dave Iverson.
Aye.
Rachel Freeman.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Okay, great. Our first item is Coastal Resilience Funding Mechanism discussion with Brian Turbot, Finance Director for the town of Nantucket, and Libby Gibson, Town Manager. I was thinking, Joanna, if you could lead off, since you were our letters author, and we're looking for Libby and for Brian to sort of help us see how these things can work for us. So you can go ahead, Joanna.
Sure. I mean, it's really super simple from the perspective that we've been meeting for a number of years and talking about all of the priorities in the Coastal Resiliency Plan. And we know that the mechanism that the town has right now is $1 million a year to fund some of these projects. And we have a larger budget or expected budget than that, through which we know we need to generate funds for. And so we were looking to explore the various ways in which we could do that. And so after John DeGiorgio came to our meeting, I think it was in December, we started brainstorming ways in which, based on his feedback, that we could establish some regular funding for these projects going forward. And that was the origin of the letter. Does that make sense to everybody?
It makes sense.
Yep.
And Libby and Brian, we know we're an advisory committee. We're grassroots and hashing out all the little nitty gritties so that we can advise the select board. And we know that we're not in charge of finance, but we need to understand it before we can recommend to the select board. And so we're hoping you guys can help us understand it better.
Sure. Should we launch in?
Go ahead.
Okay. So the letter is a little bit dated in terms of what's happened since April 8th with town meeting. And I know that we were supposed to come on to a meeting before now, so that's on us. But there's a reference to a fall 2025 special town meeting. That is not a definitive right now, based on some stuff that happened at the town meeting and the election, like the DPW supplemental design funds weren't approved and Our Island Home was sort of half approved. And those were the things that were potentially going to be the reason for a special town meeting in the fall. So that is a little up in the air right now. So don't fall in love with the idea that we're going to have a special in the fall. The select board will be having a discussion at their meeting this Wednesday about the election and town meeting results, and a discussion about a special may come out of that. So just FYI. And then moving into your items here, we are of course well aware of the Coastal Resiliency Plan's costs, which are only going to escalate if we are going to implement everything. And of course, that is over a very significant period of time. None of this is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, which is about the realistic length of our capital improvement plan. Article 10. So as you correctly note here, we have been allocating and appropriating $1 million per year for the items that are noted in your letter. However, I just want to point out, while it's more or less accurate to say that Article 10 funds require town administration approval and can be accessed by any department, we've really narrowed that expenditure to coastal resiliency projects only, and they are coordinated essentially through the Coastal Resiliency Coordinator. And other departments are not really allowed to access those funds without going through coastal resiliency. So there's an internal structure there, and Leah keeps track of what's been spent or committed from that funding source. So I think it's a bit more organized than possibly you might be aware of. Now, these funding sources that you've put forward here, a special purpose stabilization fund, and Brian and I are just going to give you our kind of higher level thoughts about these things. And Brian, he and I have spoken about these items, and I think I'm going to give kind of an administrative reaction and he will give a financial reaction. So a dedicated coastal resiliency stabilization fund would not ensure that funds actually go into that fund. We have other special stabilization funds, and they require an appropriation in by town meeting vote, and they require a town meeting vote to get the funds out. So currently, the $1 million, for example, is appropriated at town meeting, and then town meeting doesn't have any further approval authority unless there's some other project that's going to require more money. But they're done once the $1 million is approved per year. A special stabilization fund would mean going to town meeting every time you want to take funds out of there. Potential funding sources for that fund, I think we have a little bit of concerns about what these potential funding sources are, and that's not to say that maybe there are other funding sources that haven't really been explored yet or may not be in existence yet. A small percentage of an existing tax or fee, such as the local hotel tax, that funding source, Brian and I have talked repeatedly about this. We have some concerns as to its stability going forward, and it is very much largely integrated at this point into the town's overall operating budget, including the $1 million, and that the select board has been approving, and the FinCom as well, for the coastal resiliency projects. a future tax override or debt exclusion to support large-scale, high-priority projects. This would really have to be targeted to a specific project. The select board and the finance committee and the capital program committee are never going to approve a vague, we need a bunch of money for long-term projects. That's just not going to happen. The projects need to go through the existing process of capital projects, and that is how the funding would be allocated. Betterments or special assessments, this is actively being explored for other projects, and it has in fact been used already for other projects, including Sheep Pond Road, where the new alternative access there will have betterments associated with it, and also Baxter Road alternative access. I know that isn't specifically in the Coastal Resiliency Plan, but it is a project that directly benefits homeowners out there. And that's a project that we are intending to better. However, hopefully everybody realizes, even when you're going to better a project, you still need the money up front. So Baxter Road, for example, that's a 30, 35, $40 million project. That's going to have to be approved by town meeting with betterments to be paid back over time. And that time is 20 to 30 years. So that is a valid, though, potential funding source, although, as I just said, it's kind of over time. Brian, do you want to make any, if we go maybe one by one here, and then Brian can comment on these things, there can be questions or discussions, and then we'll go on to the next one, if that sounds okay.
Can I just ask one question before you get
Sure.
going, just to clarify?
Yeah.
So Baxter Road will say betterments or special assessments, the 30 to 40 million. That's essentially a coastal resilience district, because that's what you're doing for those people. Is that correct?
Well, it has not been dedicated at this point as a formalized coastal resiliency district. That is another avenue that Vince has been exploring. And it, as you may or may not recall, there was a home rule petition that came before the 2024 annual town meeting. It was tabled. And it was tabled with the idea that we do some more public outreach. There was kind of a misunderstanding at town meeting about what a coastal resiliency district in fact is. And I think we haven't maybe totally focused all resources on it yet, but it is a tool in our toolbox to fund these projects. But again, I think it would be similar to Baxter Road alternative access. The town will have to pay up front. And then the project, and then the funding gets paid back over time, unless there's something more to it, and Vince is more the expert on that.
Can I just elaborate on that very slightly?
Just a very little bit, and then we'll go to Brian.
So it's a very hard thing to do to correct your superiors. The home rule petition, Libby, was the one that failed. The bylaw part was the part that passed. That was the one that focused on mapping. And I've been working with a consulting firm to work through even the basic rules for how the mapping works so that we can develop those maps island-wide. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Vince.
Thank you, Vince. Sorry. Thank you for correcting me.
So,
Brian?
sure. So just to follow on, Mr. Chair, to what Libby was talking about, I think even at finance committee meetings, I've been pretty clear that I've never been a fan of special purpose stabilization funds, because they create hurdles to get the money out, and they create difficulties in getting the money out of the fund. It takes a majority to put the money out, put the money into the fund. I believe, I have to double check, but I believe it still takes a 2/3 majority to get the money out. Even if it takes a simple majority to get the money out, if you can't get a simple majority at town meeting to back the project, then the money doesn't come out for the project, and it stays in the fund until you get a project that a simple majority at town meeting, or 2/3 majority, if that is in fact still the case, support a project. And if you can't do that, then the money continues to just sit in that fund, and we have a dedicated fund for which we're having a difficult time getting the money out of it. So I've never been a really big supporter of special purpose stabilization funds because I think they create barriers, potential barriers to completions of projects. And I think they put roadblocks in the way of government moving forward on things that may be critical or essential or things that it would like to accomplish. A debt exclusion, I don't believe would be a way to fund it because debt exclusions by their very nature are for specific lengths of times and are excluded for specific purposes. We typically use those for borrowing for projects. As an example, the construction of the intermediate school is a debt exclusion. It's a borrowing for a set period of time, in that case, 20 years. And when it's done, there's no authority after that borrowing has been paid off to continue to raise that into taxes. An override would be permanent, but that would be something the selectmen would have to endorse and ultimately put on the ballot with the voters to approve. A small percentage of existing taxes, as the town manager did mention, the room occupancy tax is really largely been budgeted and utilized in the general fund budget. Just as a note, 1% would only be $136,000 based on the money that was collected in 24. So if we're really trying to go after a larger sum of money, it's a 1% really is not, I don't think would actually really do a lot to help coastal resiliency. I mean, I think the $1 million that we're allocating right now is probably doing a lot more than something really small like that. So again, I think that the idea is great, but I'm not a big fan of special purpose stabilization funds because I find them to be very limiting. And the hurdles of getting them out, I find sometimes can present a challenge. And then you're stuck with something that's just continuing to build up money that you have a difficulty getting it out.
All right, thank you, Brian. Libby, do you want to move on to creating a revolving fund?
Sure. Okay, so, Brian and I have been talking about this as well, and we actually don't think a coastal resiliency separate revolving fund is necessarily needed. We have already a revolving fund for the revenue from beach sticker sales, and that is essentially divided into what the police department needs for beach patrols, including ATV replacement, purchase of ATVs, and the staffing of the patrols. And are the lifeguards paid out of there, Brian?
Yes, they are.
And the lifeguard program. And then the NRD uses it for fencing and signage and activities related to endangered species and perhaps other beach management things. So we were thinking maybe the purpose of that fund could be amended to be a little more specific as to the use of those funds and make sure that coastal resiliency projects and, like you say here, access permitting, other relevant activities could be included in the uses of the revolving fund. We have discussed a $50 increase in the beach sticker fees. And so just FYI, and hopefully we're going to resolve this, there are two tiers of the beach sticker fees. One is correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, if there's a $50 fee for year-round residents, and there's a $150 fee for non-residents and people who purchase stickers after a certain date. So we don't have a breakout of how much comes in with the $50 fee and how much comes in from the $150 fee. But broad picture, if we tacked on $50 to, I guess, both fees, we estimate it would bring in approximately $300,000 in additional revenue. That number needs to be refined. And also it does not that is based on current sales. It does not take into account what would happen if fee were increased. Would people buy fewer stickers? Who knows? That it could have an impact on the revenue. But that is something that I think we could get behind following up on. Do you want to add anything, Brian?
Yes, so for Nantucket registered vehicles, the fee is $50 before May 31st, and it goes to $100 on or after June 1st. And off island is $100. And if they purchase it after June 30th, it goes to $150. As the town manager mentioned, right now, the police, the way it's set up, we're not able to break it out between how many are Nantucket registered vehicles versus off-island registered vehicles. Last year, there was 6,182 beach stickers sold for fiscal 24. As town manager alluded to, it would bring in a little over $300,000 in additional income or revenue. There is a little bit of a concern if we continue, when you raise fees, what that will do to the fee and what that will do to people's willingness to purchase that particular or utilize that particular benefit. Especially, and I've talked to the deputy police chief, and there is a question about whether or not a $50, basically a doubling for on-island registered vehicles before May 31st and a 50% increase for off-island before June 30th, whether or not people will find that increase, the benefit that they receive in the locations that they can actually drive on, is it worth that increase or not? And if we start to see a diminishing number of stickers being purchased, then it doesn't benefit the additional increase won't help the coastal resiliency side, but that decrease will also then not help the current recipients in the revolving fund. So I think the town manager and I have discussed it, and I do kind of more support the alternative of leaving the fee where it is and amending the language in the current revolver to allow for the amounts that are available to be spent annually to be utilized for coastal resiliency as a way to begin to generate some revenue, and to look at the fees and to look at whether beach stickers continue to remain at the levels that they are. We have to remember that pre-COVID, we were in the 4,000 or roughly 4,000 beach sticker range. Post-COVID is when we saw a market increase. In 2020, we only sold 2,600 stickers, and we've had an increase since then, a little bit more consistently into the 2022 we had 7,000, 23 it was 6,100, so we did see a substantial decline, and then 24, as I said, it was 6,182, and as of right now, we've only brought in $300,000 of revenue, and it's May 27th. Granted, we see a pretty big ramp up in the next 4 days, and then through to June 30th, but if we continue to see it, if we start to see a decline, then the $50 increase may have an adverse or detrimental effect on the number of stickers, which also has a decreased impact or availability of funds for marine and natural resources who are already receiving those funds. So we just want to be cautious when we're raising fees to really understand the impact. And I think as I mentioned, one of the concerns with marine and police is with the limited number of available points to be able to utilize the sticker, a large increase, will people find it to not be as much of a benefit and something that they can worth the cost in the areas that they can utilize it on.
Just to add a tiny bit, the revolving fund purpose, it's called the Beach Improvement Fund, and it currently says, in accordance with Chapter 56, Section 7A of the Town Code, including Endangered Species Monitor Program, beach patrols and monitors, beach use education and information. So we could probably fairly easily add something about coastal resiliency to that. And we right now have the revenue kind of like divided between police and NRD, and we could internally figure out how to make that a little bit more formal. Do you want to go to the next one, Peter?
Peter, I
Linda?
have just one comment.
Yeah, okay, go ahead, Gary.
And I like the suggestion from both Libby and Brian. What is the process by which you will be able to make that slight modification to the existing fund so that also added is language that might relate to coastal resiliency issues? How does that get done?
It gets done at town meeting, the annual town meeting.
Has to go to town meeting? Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you, Gary. Yeah, the next one, the next bullet item.
All right, why these funding mechanisms are critical. So I think we definitely know why they're critical. But I think what needs to be realized is this phrase here, without dedicated capital funding, projects may be planned but lack the financial backing for execution. Every capital project that we have goes through a capital improvement project process, and these are no different. The town is meeting voters, anybody. No one is going to say, let's do a $940 million debt exclusion for the projects that are in the queue. That's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. And they're going to have to come as they are coming through the capital improvement planning process. And I think Leah and Vince are doing a really good job shepherding them through. We also, of course, can only take on so many projects at one time. We can't do them all at one time, and we probably have our hands full with what we have now. Plus, I think what we are potentially facing now, particularly with the downtown flood mitigation barrier, is some how shall I put this? Some resistance to the projections that the town has put forward. And I think that it's possible, along with many other cities and towns coastally located, we are still in the acceptance phase of people who need to understand and realize that, as Vince has been repeatedly saying, the water is coming, and we need to plan for it. There's a lot of opinions out there about when the water is coming, if the water is coming, how much water is coming, but it's all happening, and there's evidence all over the place of it. But when it comes time for people to spend their own money on adjacent infrastructure, I think we are seeing that they are resisting that to some extent, or want to be more part of it, or whatever. And I think that's something that's going to have to be worked through. Ensuring financial stability and predictability. Yes, a proactive funding approach will allow the town to avoid financial shocks and reliance on emergency funding when resilience projects become urgent. That concept can apply to any capital project. We have infrastructure projects that could become urgent, and there are mechanisms in place to deal with those if needed. Leveraging state and federal grant opportunities. Dedicated municipal funds will position the town for competitive grant applications. I am not under the impression at all that we have foregone grant opportunities because we don't have enough matching contribution. And if we haven't been approved for something, it's probably because we didn't meet all the criteria, but it isn't really related to a local contribution. Leah and Vince could most certainly correct me on that, but I don't think matching funds is necessarily a problem. There are grant applications out there, but again, we only have a bandwidth of so much, and we can apply for as much as we can, but we are not going to be able to implement all of it in the time frame of the grant, most likely. We have to prioritize what we're focusing on, which I think is one of the things that this committee is doing and working on. Demonstrating a community commitment to resilience, clear and sustainable funding strategy, reinforce public confidence. I totally agree with that, but and again, I think we're still in the acceptance phase. Leah and Vince have been holding public informational sessions. Those are just going to have to continue until more people are on board with the fact that an island is going to suffer from coastal flooding soon. It already is, and we need to deal with it. But I think there are pockets of resistance, shall we say, as to when and how and if that is all going to happen. And some of those pockets of resistance might actually be within town government. So we need to keep at this before we start asking the voters to approve a funding strategy that is ongoing. I think we saw a little bit of this when Vince was bringing forward the coastal district proposals. Brian, do you want to add anything to any of that?
No, I think you covered it. I mean, I do want to remind Speaking of with respect to the grants, and I can't speak to if we've missed an opportunity, but I did just want to remind the committee that the Article 10 funds for that the town has been allocating the $1 million, they'd actually, because that's in Article 10 and it's a capital allocation, it never goes away. So that money, if it's not fully expended in a year, whatever is left rolls over and is continuously available. So if we've been, as an example, if we've been allocating for 5 years and we've spent $500,000 in year one, that $500,000 in the first year is still available. So we likely have built up some amount of money there. So there is money available likely from some of those years. I don't believe we spent it all. So I believe that there would be a way to show a commitment. It may not, I don't know if it would be enough of a commitment depending on what the grant was, but Article 10 money does not ever get returned back into the general fund or get closed out to free cash. So there is funds available that have been allocated. I don't want it to sound as if there's no money available at all.
Can I also briefly comment on grants, please?
Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you. So not from the purely coast resilience point of view, but from the sustainability point of view, I track basically every grant that we can apply for. Most of the time the grant comes in, we have to read it, we have to see if there's a project that'll match up to it. It's not always the case. Then when we do apply for a grant, we have to identify the matching fund, which is really simple for the coast resilience projects because there's this $1 million a year in place. So there's a lot of misnomers around grants. We don't get every grant we apply for. Roughly speaking, organizations get about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 grants they apply for. We've been exceptionally lucky, and I've been tracking it, and we're hitting just a little under 50%. So we're hitting like 45, 48% of the grants we apply for, we get. And that's only over about the last 4 or 5 years, is what I've been collecting information for. So we've been more successful than most. And where we also pick up a lot of points in grants is the fact that we apply the first year, we might not get it. We do the follow-up interviews and asking the questions, and we apply a second year, and then we are more successful and generally get it. And the classic example of this at the moment is the Easy Street grant from CZM for, I think, about $470,000 thereabouts. I did it the first year. It failed. We collected the information. The grant, the whole position and all of the information transferred to Leah, and she won it the second year. So we have been extremely successful in getting grants town-wide as well as in coastal resilience.
Thanks, Vince. I'm going to ask everybody if they want to say something, but I want to just say a couple of things first. Going to item 2, it's basically what this is all about is we know that there's resistance from the public and we feel it, and we have people that attend our meetings who are resisting what's going on, and we see the resistance in the Francis Street Beach project and the Easy Street flood mitigation plan proposal. But we have to see, and one thing I say a lot, which the committee is probably tired of me saying, is that we feel that we are the longest range planners in the town because we're looking decades in advance. We're trying to see beyond the naysayers and be ready, have the town be ready for what's coming, even though we don't know exactly. We have our predictions, our conservative predictions of how high the water's going to come, but upcoming in I don't know what the date is, but there's going to be a Zoom call about what the trustees and the foundation are doing to protect the haulover. And but eventually the haulover will be overrun, overwashed, as will Great Point, as will Coatue, and the water will be coming, open ocean water will be coming at the town. And that's how far I look ahead. I look ahead to Brant Point, maybe all of that being underwater, and people don't want to hear that, but that's a reality we have to deal with. So then we translate that into money, and we're thinking, God, we're only getting $1 million a year. How do we get more? So that's why this is happening. That's why we're asking you And just wondering if Article 10 funds, do Libby and Brian think that those could increase over time? You think that you'll bring it up incrementally based on the cost of things? And
I don't see why not. I don't want to speak for Brian or the select board, but I think that that's probably something we should evaluate every, I don't know, 3 to 5 years or something like that. See how we've done with those funds, what grants might be out there on the horizon to apply for, what projects are within our grasp that we could realistically implement and increase it accordingly like that. Yes, I don't see why it couldn't be routinely reviewed.
And so I know that you have to go through the capital project process to do something. But I think maybe this committee is thinking that we got to have the funds if we have to do something right away. Something that happens. We don't know what that is, but we have to be prepared for that. Because this isn't looking out and going, okay, we want to build the Tom Nevers bike path. We got to go through that process. We want to build our island home. We want to do the DPW project. We know the process for that. All land-based things away from the water. But the water, I mean, we know what the current administration is doing to our weather prediction capabilities. We just want to be prepared if we have to react right away, and we don't have time to go through the capital project review process.
So, Peter, I would just say to that concept again could apply to a multitude of items in the town.
Okay.
Baxter Road is one of those items. There's a vulnerable area there. If that fails, we're going to need to act very quickly. And we have a plan for that. Hopefully there are some identified, and I think there are vulnerable areas coastal resiliency wise around the island. And there are more or less plans to, at least on an interim basis, deal with those things until a bigger solution can be reached. And that might mean money, it might mean something else. Ames Ave is another area. We have had a lot of internal discussion about that. It is going to most likely require the acquisition of an easement over private property, which we're working on. And even something like that, like that's not really a money issue necessarily. It's more of a select board and or town meeting must take action issue. So I think we definitely understand where you're coming from on that, but unless there's a specific project identified we might have to do this, and here's the sort of odds as to whether it might happen or not. I just don't see the FinCom or select board going along with a large capital appropriation for something that's sort of vague.
Okay.
I just want to follow on to say that, I mean, if something unexpected happened, that created the necessity to remedy a situation immediately, there's tools available to the town to deal with that situation. Even if if we had no funding for it, there's options the state has. We have tools available if a situation arose like you're talking about that we didn't foresee, and and we had to immediately address or fix something. So if that's the purpose of having a funding for coastal resiliency, there's tools in the toolbox between this DOR gives us options in asking for authorization for spending. DCAM gives us options in asking for authorizations for waivers from procurement if we had an emergency type situation that we couldn't foresee. So if that's what we're kind of looking for here to deal with from a coastal resiliency perspective, we have other abilities to deal with those if they arise.
And Brian, to give you a little example of something, the sewer break of 2018, January 4th, is a good example of an emergency situation that required the use of these tools that Brian is speaking of to get it patched up in the interim and then immediately start planning for a new sewer force main.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that detailed explanation. That's what I wanted to hear. I'm gonna go to Matt because he had his hand up first, and then let's switch over to Leah. So go ahead, Matt.
I actually think Leah had hers up first. She beat me to it.
Okay, go ahead, Leah.
Thanks, Peter and Matt. I have two questions. So the first is, I think the grant bullet point was more about construction grants. And so if there are still federal grants for coastal resiliency construction and the town has to put, let's say, 20% match, the grant that we're asking for is $100 million. Where could we get that large amount of money to match that construction grant? Is there a current process, or do we need to set up, a different type of funding mechanism?
Brian, you want to take that first? And just while Brian's thinking, if there was a $100 million project and we had to come up with 20% of that, there is in no world a way that we'd be able to do that without town meeting and without a debt exclusion. And there's no way that town meeting is going to say, well, just in case you get $100 million grant, yeah, we'll approve that.
Yeah, we'd be hard pressed to be able to even get a debt exclusion for something that we didn't know what it was. Because town meeting would need, when they vote on it, they generally, when they're voting for the debt exclusion, they've already approved the particular project that they're agreeing to exempt the funding from the limits and constraints of Proposition 2.5. And when we do a borrowing authorization, it has to be pretty specific for what it's for. So I don't know that we would be able to just go to a town meeting with something written that just says, in case we have a grant. I'm just making up the language, Leah. I don't know how we would structure it. So I don't know in your scenario, if you found out tomorrow that you could get 100 million for a construction grant for 100 million, how we would access the $20 million if 20% immediately, or immediately to be able to do it, to be quite honest with you, because there is a process with capital, and that would require, and something of that magnitude would require a borrowing authorization, which would require town meeting and a special town election, because we would debt exclude that.
Okay, so you'd have to receive the grant first, hope that they would wait for town meeting to get that matching piece to be able to implement.
That's something that large, we would not have there'd be no way for us to cobble together a 20% match on something that large to be
Okay.
able to sign off on having it. I mean, if it was 2 million, we might be able to say we have available funding in these sources that we could use until we got to town meeting, but a 20 million, in that example, there'd be no way to do it
Okay.
without a town meeting.
Okay. And then based on that, are there any, other than the two mechanisms that were proposed, number one probably is not recommended, but is there any other mechanisms where we could start putting money into for those construction grants and for those large matching portions for a particular project?
I think we probably need to have a discussion about that, about what particular projects might be looked at for that. And again, I think the FinCom, possibly Capcom, maybe the select board, I'm not sure, might have a concern about, well, so today we estimate that project might cost $50 million. But what if in 5, 10, however many years before the project might become a reality, it's doubled in cost, or we don't need it anymore, or it's a different project now because of regulation changes or circumstantial changes or whatever. I think there will be a reluctance to put money aside for projects in advance of the project being something that is, what's the word? It is coming together as a real thing.
What,
But
what's your,
Brian, you might have.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is I think to be honest with you, I think part of it, and this was at Matt's suggestion a few years ago, was the $1 million in Article 10 is kind of the initial focus or attempt by the town to start setting some money aside. I mean, granted, we started as we become more focused on coastal resilience, I think we've become more focused on using it a little bit, but I think that was the initial attempt by the town to start setting money aside for various coastal resilience projects in a way, right? As far as I don't know if there's another mechanism better than allocating money through the $1 million and looking and reviewing it. I think there's been a push after Our Island Home failed at the annual town meeting to get the 2/3. There's been a push. There was a letter in the Inquirer Mirror for the town to really start scouring all of its approved capital projects that have been completed to see if there's available balances that could be transferred. So, I mean, I think that there's going to be a more focus on what available balances are left from capital that maybe could be transferred to fund things too. But I think Article 10 is the best way to do it. I think these are laudable ways or thought processes to do it. I think they come with inherent challenges that make them difficult to utilize on the scale that you need funding for, to be honest with you. And the one other thing that we didn't mention about specifically with a revolving fund, there's a limit on the total value of all the revolving funds. We're not necessarily there in total yet, but with the scope and scale of coastal resilience projects, that could put a strain on the amount of how many revolving funds we could have. So I think I think Article 10, because the funding never lapses, is the best vehicle for the town to use for what you're trying to accomplish for coastal resilience projects.
thank you very much, Brian, and Libby, for explaining everything to us. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, hi. No, I think Leah's question is a good one. And I think what it does because I think we have to shift our perspective from we have to know exactly what we're doing and then we can get the money because we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know it's going to happen. And I think if we shift the perspective and we have put money through Article 10 and it's gone up a little bit every year and we've been conservative and only spent, 25% a year of it, we might actually start to build a bit of a bit of money in case we need a lot for one project. I think that's sort of a way to think about it. And we will be ahead of other communities. So when they have to spend 1.5 years or 2 years to fill out the forms and get a vote and everything else, we might actually have our matching. So I think that, we have to just shift our perspective and we're in the midst of doing that, I hope. The part that I think that needs work next, I agree with Libby that, there's some pushback on some aspects of this. I think some of that pushback is because we don't have a reasonable funding strategy laid out. We aren't able to say this will cost, if we put all of this on the tax base, it's going to cost everybody X. If we better these things, X amount here, X amount there, X amount, then it will cost you Y. Like we have to put that framework together. We need a sort of a work group figuring that out. And it doesn't matter whether it's called betterments or it's called, a coastal resiliency district or whatever, but people who are gaining, more benefit on the front row, how do we fairly pay that? How do we get them to contribute? Because, I look at it as there's only 3 things. So we can either get outside funding, grants, etc. We can do some, betterments so that the people who are benefiting pay some, or we put it all on the taxes. So if we could have a work group that just puts those into, either an internal town one or a town one with a couple people from the coastal resiliency, if we could put that together and then have our public meetings, and if we were able to explain to people, hey, if we, okay, we're just going to put it all on the tax base and your taxes are going to quadruple. But if we actually better certain areas with that, you know, what the public isn't using completely, then okay, your taxes are not gonna quadruple. They're gonna go up X, they're gonna go up a third, or they're gonna go up half for all of these expenses. I think we have to have that answer. And then I agree, it's gonna still take a few years, because people are gonna, they'd much rather have someone else pay for it than themselves if they could do that. But if they know, gee whiz, you know, if we put it on the tax base, I'm gonna be croaked, then they actually will listen to us a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Do we have comments, other comments from the committee or questions? Well, I got a question for Libby and for Brian. At the beginning, Libby said, you know, we're meeting resistance with some members of the public, including some members of town administration, town departments. And one of the things we've been working on for the last couple of years is public education and informing people. We've had Ava Rollins doing video interviews of each of us so that the public knows who we are and running those. But I'm wondering, in this $1 million a year, and as it builds up, can we draw from that and do public education campaigns and projects and things like that? You know, something we've talked about but haven't done yet would be a short video that would show on the town's website and hopefully be in amongst the previews at the Dreamland and on the boats and anywhere where you could grab people's attention for a minute or two. We knew we could use that. Anyway.
Peter, I would say, yes, you could use the money for that. And also I want to correct something. I did not say there were pockets of resistance in town administration and departments. I said in town government.
Okay. The broader description.
Broader, yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, I like the public outreach idea. This video series that you're talking about sounds really good. And obviously we all know that to the extent you can get something out widely that isn't like a 35-minute video, it's like a 3-minute video, or like maybe even a 30-second video about the importance of this, and direct them to where they can get more information. That's the most effective, you know, outreach, I think, probably that can be done right now. But sure. Yeah, I think Leah you might have even asked about this sort of recently. I think we said yes, or maybe I imagined that, but I don't see why not.
Okay, great. Anyone else with questions or comments in the committee? Okay, are there any members of the public that have a comment or a question? Okay, dead silence. I think we're all set. Oh, wait, go ahead, Gary.
Just to agree with the suggestions being made by Libby and Brian, I think that to the extent that we can somehow over time kind of index the amount that is being set aside at town meeting. It's $1 million now. I don't know if, you know, it's not the inflation index, but maybe it's the number of days that you know, when Washington Street is closed on a sunny day, high tide, maybe that's a signal, some kind of an indexing, so that $1 million gets supplemented each year. At least the nice thing about that, according to what I heard from Brian, is that when it's needed, when those funds are needed to address some of the issues we're dealing with, we don't have to go back to town meeting as we would with a revolving fund. That sounds great to me. So I hope we can figure out how to continue indexing up that $1 million a year that we've been getting in the past, so that soon it'll be $1.25 million or $1.5 million next year, whatever. That's my thoughts.
All right, excellent, Gary. Thank you. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Pete. I've just been kind of listening and mulling this over, and I guess what I keep coming back to is it sounds like we're falling back a little bit on this fund that we're keeping for coastal resilience, both as building it for matching for construction grants in the future, which by the time you do a construction grant, you know exactly what you're doing. You're ready for it. You can't apply for a grant if you don't already have, like, 90% construction plans. So that's a kind of final thing. But getting to that matching grant, we also need to do all the work beforehand. So we need money to get us to that 95% construction plans ready to actually put it on the ground. And this fund isn't going to do all those things. We have 10 to 15 projects that we've identified very strongly with concepts of what needs to happen in them in the coastal resilience plan. What we're seeing is an issue moving those forward because we have a limitation on the amount of staff, the amount of projects that staff can do. Obviously, there's only so much that people can do in a position. So there's a limitation of staff. And I think we've already talked about this. It would be great if there was additional staff that are available to work on coastal resilience plans and implementing the projects that need to happen. But there's also a limitation on money, both for paying those staff and for starting the work that needs to happen to come up with the plans to do implementation. And we can wait till things happen and then do emergency responses, which will cost us more money and potentially not be the solutions that we want to see that will actually be effective, or thinking proactively about how we move things forward now. So I just listening to everything that's been said, my frustration point is, where do we get that money to move these things ahead that we know needs to happen now? And that's what we keep coming up against. Yeah, that's just my feedback on what I'm thinking there, and putting stuff aside each year into a fund, which it sounds like we need to increase, that's great. But seeing that prioritization for more staff and more funding and not just going after grants, because those aren't guaranteed. You could get $1 million grant 2 years ago for coastal resilience, but you might not be able to do that next year. And so we need to hope that we can get funding from elsewhere, but there needs to be prioritization of other funding ahead of time.
Good points. Thanks, Jen. Anybody else? Brian?
Mr. Chair, but I think to that point, though, most, if not all of the coastal resilience projects are actually programmed in some manner into the capital program plan. Because when I look at our capital program plan, their projects are in that capital program plan. So in various out years, because I've seen them in the plan. So I'm not sure. I feel like there might be some type of a little bit of a disconnect, because I think like some of the longer range plans that might be being referred to are actually, some of them are actually in the town's long range capital planning. So they would be coming up and being identified and being programmatically being discussed and presented to Capcom through town administration and FinCom, and ranked and rated in the same process as the plan and any other capital plan that's in the plan, and ultimately brought to town meeting for funding. So
can I respond or ask a question to that, Pete?
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. I guess what we've seen is that, yes, things might be in the capital in that plan, but the timing of them, partly due to the fact of how many staff are available to work on those projects, is not going to be as efficient as it needs to be. So, and I can go to a specific project, and that's, and Leah, please let me know if I talk out of turn on this, but Leah and I have talked a lot about Folgers Marsh and Pulpus Road. And the fact that when we first put the coastal resilience plan together, the timing on when that might actually flood was partly dictated when the time was we'd start to pay attention to that, but also when those projects could be rolled onto staff, because staff could only handle so many projects at once. So that's part of the timing piece. It's just a logistical timing piece. But the reality of getting those projects done within the time frame that it takes to get the people to come, you do the study to figure out what your intervention is, then you have to get the engineering designs, and all those pieces take, 5 to 10 years. And when those timings are first put together in the coastal resilience plan, that timeline of getting projects to the table was not necessarily incorporated in. So like the Pulpus Road and Folgers, we're seeing impacts already there. So if that's something that could be acted on in the next year, 2 years to start the process, we'd be ahead of actually having an emergency situation. So there's that piece. That's the timing that you guys are planning on is almost that emergency planning timeline versus the let's get things done a little bit earlier. And what we've been talking about with Folgers is, yeah, we asked last year to see if it could go to town meeting so we could move that project ahead because we could get other funding sources. But CapCon didn't end up passing it because of the timeline that was in crack and because of all the other projects that are on town. So standing from the outside looking in, I can see projects that if we could act on them now, next year, have the staff and the resources to do it, we'd be setting Nantucket up to be much better in the long term. So that's kind of where I'm coming from is, yeah, that process is in place, but I think we need to think about how to make it better and how to move faster on it if we can, because there's so many priorities that always come up that the town is going to have to focus on. That's not just coastal resilience, but we don't want to see these things get lost. And then we're seeing solutions that we don't actually want to have on island, which might be the position we get into eventually.
Thanks, Jen. Go ahead, Libby.
Thank you. I'm just gonna say that I don't disagree with anything that Jen just said. And a lot of what she said leads into a lot of other things. So for example, we need more staff to execute these projects. We need more office space to put the staff. We can't get the town voters to approve design funding for a municipal office facility at 2 Fairgrounds Road. The 2 Fairgrounds Road building needs major work. Talk about an issue waiting to happen where we have to do something immediately and find some money somewhere. That's a very good one. So these projects, as Brian said, need to work through the process, and they just simply cannot all be done at the same time for a variety of reasons. And I agree, Folgers Marsh, I don't know where the lag is there, but another issue on all of these projects is permitting, and permitting takes a very long time. And right now, the state has fewer permitting agency staff than they have had. As we know, at the federal level, they don't really believe in permitting. So staff is, being retracted and not funded, and we're dealing with that whole dynamic as well. So I would just encourage us to annually probably look at the coastal resiliency plan and just kind of update where we are with you probably already do this, but update where we are with all of the projects that are in the near term, 3 to 5 years, make sure they're in the capital improvement plan, and then they need to be advocated for at CapCom, but also they need to be paid for. And to the extent that there's grants, that's great, but grants hardly ever cover everything. So that's just a little bit more of a perspective, that's all.
No, we definitely needed that. Thank you. Go ahead, Holly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just from a point of clarification on the Folgers Marsh, I think is a prime example. Not to lose sight that there are projects that were implemented within the hazard mitigation plan, which we'll be updating here shortly. Folgers Marsh is one, the Sacajah Pond one is another, and then the culverts on Mattock Road. And I think it's important to, as a planner, if we have a project in one plan and it's also in another plan, it does allow us to be able to implement it a little bit easier as far as getting grants, and also saying the reasons why these are important. And all of those projects are going to be obviously pushed forward even further when we do the next update to the HMP. But I just wanted to mention that those were projects specifically outlined in the first HMP that was done in 2007 and then subsequently in 2019. And we're going to be obviously mentioning them again. So just important.
Thanks, Holly. Vince, something to add?
Yes, thank you. Very briefly, yes, Folgers Marsh is a big need and a big ask is the problem associated with it. Any of the very large price tag projects in the CRP, such as Folgers Marsh, Sacajah Pond, First and Second Bridge on the Mattocket Road, they're all associated with both isolation areas and eye-watering figures. Like I'm sorry to say that word. Mattocket Road at First and Second Bridge, that's a $40 million project. Sacajah Pond, another $40 or $41 million project. What makes Folgers Marsh a bit more appealing is the fact that it's just a little bit cheaper. It's, I think, about a $20 million project. But again, you have to have it through design and permitting with all the seed funding in place so you can go for the grants. If we can't get things like a retirement home or a DPW facility or a town facility, it's a hard sell to get Folgers Marsh when, I hate to say it, there's a second way of getting to town through Sacajah Pond. Not a good answer, because in the long term, both of them are in trouble. So, you know, the eye-watering figures are another issue to overcome.
All right, thank you, Vince. Do we have anyone else? Any other comments, committee members, staff? Okay, one more time, any members of the public that have anything to say? All right, great. This was, go ahead, Libby.
I just want to say thank you for inviting us. We really appreciate it, and appreciate your checking in with us, and we're happy to come to any other future meetings if you need a little bit of input or perspective or anything like that. So, and we also appreciate the hard work you guys are doing. It is no easy task to get people to accept all of this. And I think we actually, in talking with other managers of coastal communities, we are ahead of a lot of other places, both resource wise, staffing wise, and planning wise. I know we might not see it quite like that, but in my observations, we really and truly are, and we have a lot more to deal with, I would say, than some other towns do. So kudos to all of you. You're really putting a lot of effort into this, and I think over time it's going to certainly pay off. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Libby. All right, well, we're going to move on to the next item. You guys are welcome to stay, but I'm sure you're busy and it's too beautiful out to be at a Zoom meeting. So thank you for coming, and we'll definitely have you back again when we need you. Okay. We have a presentation and discussion about Resilient Nantucket and the Historic District Commission with Holly Backus, Town of Nantucket Preservation Planner. Go ahead, Holly.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I know it's been a while since I've been before this committee, but you all remember in the beginning, I used to attend quite a bit. So I appreciate being able to come back. I'll just preface this that what I'm going to be talking about is mostly about where we've been and where we are now. And a lot of that has to do with prior planning and anything that's really specific on the HDC in general. I would just mention that hopefully we'll be able to have the chair or chairs attend at some point. But I really wanted to mention how important our historic identity as well as hazard mitigation helps us become a resilient Nantucket. Some history of our island. If you're not aware, we are one of the largest historic districts in the nation. 1/3 of our open space is protected. And we became one of the earliest historic districts in the country after Charleston, South Carolina in the 30s, as well as Louisiana, and then Nantucket in the 50s. We actually tied with Back Bay in Boston in 1955. 1966 became the creation of the National Historic Preservation Act. At the same time, the National Park Service created National Historic Landmarks, and we became one of them in 1966. And then through the active town meeting with CPC funding, Nantucket Preservation Trust hired consultants to extend our periodic significance, updating our NHL in 2012. That gets us from 1659 up through the whaling era, the preservation movement up to 1975. Why is that important? Well, anything that is built before up to 1975 is deemed contributing towards our local and national historic district. And remember, there's no donut holes in our jurisdiction. That is everything: Nantucket, Tuckernutt, and Muskeget. And then, of course, in 1971, after Tristram's Landing was being constructed, the island, through the act of town meeting, extended that up to for the entire island in 1971. This is important to look at. This is the preamble of the Nantucket HDC, our special act. It's unique. If you ever have a chance to listen or just sit on one of University of Florida's PIN program discussions about Nantucket and even historic districts in general, they'll always say, their professors will say that Nantucket has one of the most unique preambles of a historic district to promote the general welfare of the town of Nantucket through the preservation and protection of historic buildings, places, and districts of historic interest through the development of an appropriate setting for these buildings, places, and districts, and through the benefits resulting in the economy of Nantucket in developing and maintaining its vacation travel industry through the promotion of these historic associations. It's a mouthful, but essentially Nantucket HDC is not just a architectural review board. They are here to help protect our historic identity. So why am I here today? Well, first of all, in 2016, through the Newport Restoration Foundation, they had the first Keeping History Above Water conference in Newport. I was able to attend on behalf of the town. At that time, I was just a land use planner, not a preservation planner, but I do have a background in historic preservation. I was very fortunate to go. And I heard this lady from Annapolis, Maryland, Lisa Craig, speak about you need to make sure you get your historic and cultural resources within your hazard mitigation plan. And so there's guidance that FEMA provides. Well, speed on through a couple of years, and in 2019 we approved an update to our hazard mitigation plan, and through that process I actually became the town's HMP coordinator. Very happy to help with that process. It was the second HMP that the town basically created. The first one was in 2017, and to really think about that, it's only since the declaration in 2000 at the federal level what is when this whole process of planning for FEMA for our hazards, and these are natural hazards that we see all the time. Some of those key resources within FEMA's documents that they have a lot of different documents, and I'll share a couple other ones about helping communities plan specifically for natural hazards. And this one is the integrating historic property and cultural resources, integrating it into the hazard mitigation planning, where we're wanting to identify our historic resources, revisit some historic district regulations, incorporate them into your planning documents, and then even looking at adaptation measures. And something that Peter, you had brought up, education. Education is key about all of this. So within our updated 2019 HMP, we keyed two specific aspects towards our historic district. And one of them was to preserve our historic streetscapes while mitigating hazards, as well as to specific to the different and unique types of historic resources found on Nantucket, and those unique hazards and threats to the island. So speed up to a little bit further into 2019, while we were updating our HMP, we also went through the day-long process of becoming a MVP community with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Then Governor Baker, his goal was to have every single community, I think there's 321 communities within the Commonwealth, to become a resilient community. And as you, I think quite a few of you in this meeting right now attended that meeting. It was unique in the fact that we as a community engaged both conservationists and preservationists. So much so that when we did this and created that document and 5 different priorities to achieve, one of them becoming creating the Coastal Resiliency Coordinator, which Vince became our first. Now we have Leah. That was, I think, priority number 1. Priority number 2 was to create historic preservation guidelines specifically for adaptation to sea level rise and increasing, basically being resilient. And I think one of the key components of that, what made Nantucket unique, after we became an MVP community, I was asked to speak to the state's nonprofit, the largest nonprofit, which is Preservation Massachusetts. with a whole bunch of preservationists wanting to know, how did Nantucket get preservationists involved in the conversation? How did we get them in the planning process? And I guess one of the most aspects is that's us. We have to be resilient if we're living 30 miles out to sea. And preservation and conservation is part of our identity. We're all in this together. So out of the MVP community, I guess, designation, we applied for MVP funds to attack that specific element to create our design guidelines. That's where Resilient Nantucket came out of, kind of took that from our folks at Preservation Institute Nantucket. Thank you for creating that for us. And we had our own Keeping History Above Water conference, which was very, it was awesome for me at least, to have our own program here on Nantucket. The deliverables that came out of that MVP action grant was one, to create a toolkit for basically adaptation strategies, but it's really for you, the person, you, the property, as well as how to look at local, state, and national tools at your fingertip, if you will. And then obviously the largest one was the design guidelines. So if you haven't been onto our website, our design guidelines are available. This is what the cover looks like. There's a quote that I mentioned. Flooding design guidance developed for Nantucket as modeled from the National Park Service flooding adaptation treatment standards should be integrated into all relevant town planning documents as updated or completed, including now the Coastal Resiliency Plan. I'm very happy that our consultants that created the Coastal Resiliency Plan hired a sub-consultant who was actually the folks that helped create our design guidelines. These are the documents from the National Park Service. Again, I think is what's really important. I actually have a copy of the formal book that came from National Park Service. That the guidelines for our Resilient Nantucket were created out of all these documents, specifically the guidelines on flood adaptation for rehabilitation in historic districts. And then when the National Park Service created that document, they worked with FEMA. It was not created in a vacuum. And I think it's very important for folks to realize that. These are some other resources that are incorporated within our design guidelines. Our consultant utilized some great FEMA documents. Just to go through these for you real quick. And then of course, our Nantucket specific resources, our HMP update, the MVP, as well as your coastal risk assessment and resiliency strategies, all very important. As well as the information that was obtained from Preservation Institute Nantucket and all the different projects that they've worked on. They were really focusing in the last few years, really on sea level rise and being resilient with our historic district. So this is the book that I was just holding up. This is the guidance, if you will. I'm sorry, the slide's a little old, but this is the guidance that our Resilient Nantucket uses. And it really explains how to adapt our historic structures. Now, one of the key things I think is to think about is, one, something built in the 60s is considered contributing, it's considered historic. So some folks don't really like to grasp that concept, but Nantucket's period of significance goes all the way up to 1975. And if you want to check out the design guidelines, see if this linked forward. This is the town's website where you can find our design guidelines as well as the toolkit. If you click on this link here, which is in your packet, it'll take you right to our guidelines. And, you know, again, there's all sorts of aspects in here, from not only elevating a structure, the guidelines, we want to have a 4-foot high design flood elevation instead of the full whatever FEMA requests. We do, obviously that's in addition to having flood proofing mechanisms, wet flood proofing or dry flood proofing, whatever the case may be. Because if you really think about it, our architecture in New England is not like something that was built in Charleston, South Carolina, where they elevated everything to begin with. So that's important to note. Also the guidance goes into not only those flood proofing mechanisms, but also the fact that we've been relocating structures for almost 300 years as part of our national identity. Any other place in the country, if you're in a historic district and you're moving out of a historic district, you're losing your significance. Nantucket, we've been doing it, so National Park Service actually understands that, and because we have no donut holes, that's another great thing for our historic district. But also the having less impervious surfaces, so stuff that will allow the water to penetrate through, those guidelines are in here. And then also for new architecture, new construction. Bringing you back to the website, we do have the toolkit I mentioned. The toolkit is a great source. This, if you click on this, all these different sources right at your fingertip for you, from the federal to the state, at the local level, for property owners. It's a great tool. You can even look in to see what location you are on the FEMA map. That's a great thing to see. All sorts of stuff here. So if you weren't sure of this document, it's available right there. Again, thank you to MVP. All right, goes right back in here. You can also, like I said, you can also go your flood map. This is the document that we ask for when a property comes into the HDC and says, hey, I'm in FEMA flood zone and I need to elevate my structure, or I'm building a new structure and I need to be FEMA flood height. Now, one thing I think is to really understand is that historic structures, anything built up to 1975, can be exempt under the substantial compliance section of the building code. And basically, along with those flood proofing mechanisms, instead of being the full 8 feet, you can be 4 feet or whatever that you're wanting to propose, but a lower elevation is more important. But seeing what that streetscape looks like. You have to show that you are actually in that FEMA flood zone. So we ask for an elevation certificate along with FEMA's ferment map. That's a part of your review process. And that's for all either new construction or brand new. So that's the end of my my PDF. But I did want to mention that the goal is twofold. One, we want to be able to accurately protect our historic resources, whether that is something downtown or it's even out in Mattocket. Those are velocity zones out in Mattocket as well. It's for the entire island. So I think that's the best thing to take out of it, is our guidance is for the entire island. Thanks.
Thanks, Holly. The reason we wanted you here is the same reason we had the planning board here originally, was to make sure that our regulatory boards and review boards were on our page of coastal resilience, so that when applications came before them, they were making sure that the applicants understood that what they were building had to adhere as best they could to the recommendations or suggestions or even regulations, to steal your verbiage, the coastal resilience in mind, so that they didn't just go ahead, build blindly, and then wonder why the water is flooding into their living room. So it sounds like sounds like it's all there already. And so is then building with Nantucket in mind, does that contain everything you just presented? Or do you then, when people look at building with Nantucket in mind, are they then referred to this document?
Sure. So the Resilient Nantucket Design Guidelines is actually an addendum to Building with Nantucket in Mind. Building with Nantucket in Mind has not been what I would consider codified or updated since the 90s.
Right.
We've had subsequent addendums added onto it. That is a goal, I can assure you of that. It's been a goal for a long time now, but it's a goal nonetheless. My personal opinion is that the way that Building with Nantucket in Mind's addendum, Resilient Nantucket, has been done, if you look at it, it's very colorful. It gives not just pros, cons, it gives actual examples of particular, properties within our historic district. So it is a part of building with Nantucket in mind. It's just a separate document.
Okay. And for those of us who may not be aware, and maybe I'm just going to be speaking to the choir, but the HDC they're not regulating you, but they are. You go before them and you get your plans stamped, but then you're not going to get to go and use your whatever without the building department also signing off on it. So there is regulation that's going to make sure that that's going to happen. So if anyone was thinking that coastal resilience was going to slip through the cracks, it's not. So Doug, do you want to ask you?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Holly, great job. I think I would benefit by going and actually clicking on the links that you provided and kind of educating myself on what's in that Resilient Nantucket document, because it sounds really helpful. One question I'd have just while you're here is, to what degree do you feel like the guidance that HDC is providing is in any way in conflict or sort of competing with the guidance that a builder or a homeowner would have when they hear from either Concom or Plus, or the building department or the planning board? Are there friction points that you're aware of that are kind of bugging you that would be helpful for CRAC to try to help mitigate, or what's your sense of things?
Well,
Thanks.
the Resilient Nantucket was adopted by the HDC after multiple public meetings with our consultants, June 2021. So we've been utilizing it for the past 4 years, almost 4 years now. It's had to be a learning curve, both from consultants' perspective, architects, agents, even down to the homeowner, about because there always used to be, well, this is what FEMA says I have to be. FEMA is now involved in the process. You have to show, if you're in a FEMA area, and we all know our FEMA maps have been since 2014, I believe, and they haven't been updated yet. But FEMA regulates all the different areas, and we have everything from AE8 all the way up to Velocity Zone, I think 11. People were not used to coming to the HDC with an elevation certificate. I can tell you that's still Mr. Chair, we still need an elevation certificate for this project. So that is still a learning curve. I would hope that as time goes on, as people are either building, I want to say more, because it's a combination. Again, if you have an existing structure, you can adapt it by these guidelines. You can adapt it by these guidelines that have been vetted through the National Park Service and FEMA. And I think that's my biggest thing that I like people to realize, that these guidelines were not created in a vacuum. The HDC didn't come up with them on their own. These were done with consultants following the guidance at the federal level, at FEMA as well as the National Park Service. And that's what I would hope you all to take out of it. It's implementing it. It is having consultants and architects and designers reminding folks that, you might not want to have an asphalt parking lot. You might want to have an impervious, more of a porous surface and less impervious, because the guidance is there. I can say to as comments to the commission, I can say all day long, hey, they're proposing a new house here with a new driveway and they need to have an apron, but they're also showing the entire thing to be asphalt, and maybe they're down on Brant Point. I can show them the guidance in that guidelines all day long. They are the regulatory authority, but that doesn't mean they have to do that. It's not, they shall do that. And that's I think what people need to realize, the difference between guidelines and bylaws. There is a fine line between those two. I hope that helps answer.
If I could have a follow-up, Peter, real quick.
Sure.
Thank you. One example that came up in our talk with Ray Cole, it was last year sometime, was you know, a sort of an extreme example, HDC tends to have a pretty strong desire to cap height of the overall structure. And meanwhile, FEMA is putting a minimum in terms of the where living space can begin. And so you see this sort of like natural squeezing. Has that been resolved, do you think, on a practical level with HDC? Are they granting waivers in those sorts of situations? How does that work? Thanks.
So-
I'm done.
Yeah, thank you. So it's twofold. So one, it's more or less, if you are in, say, FE 8, FEMA 8, and you're building a brand new structure, there's no exemptions, right? The exemptions are only allowed to be in a historic structure, a contributing existing structure that you're trying to save it. You're trying to get it out of that flood water, and you're still trying to retain its character defining features. That's where it's important. I think that it's really the newer architecture and trying to get, again, the designers, the architects to limit their subfloor and not create 9-foot ceilings, so they can work within their means with what zoning allows for. And there is a section within the zoning bylaw that allows structures to exceed the height limits based on their location within the FEMA area. So there is that. But again, streetscapes are important. So we want to know, okay, if you're building an infill, this is what brand new structure, in between two pre-existing structures, what is that going to look like? Since sometimes those streetscapes are important. It's a case by case basis, but we try to, get people to provide that information.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Doug, and thanks, Holly. Go ahead, Leah.
Thanks. And thanks, Holly. I have a couple questions. So you had mentioned that it's guidelines and not bylaws. Are there any future ideas to change those guidelines into actual bylaws? And sort of two-part question. So that's one. And then do the HDC members generally go by the guidelines, or is it kind of like project by project?
So the HDC, being a regulatory authority, they have their special act, which is the law, and they have their guidelines, which is guidelines. If you're wanting to change something in those, you change the guidelines. Just how I reference the special act, like our Constitution, and then our design guidelines is the Bill of Rights. You want to amend this, not this. So with that, it wouldn't be necessarily the HDC to be the authority to say we want a bylaw. That would be I would assume either a general bylaw or maybe even a zoning bylaw. I don't want to speak for the planning board, but I think that's where that would go. Again, guidelines are there for the commission to, for instance, God bless his soul, John McLaughlin would say, that deck right there is more than 8 feet out. That's a guideline. That's within the original building when Nantucket had mine. They are there. There are some certain circumstances that, the commission may come up and say, because it's all about majority. Is a consensus on this design? Is it appropriate because X, Y, and Z? So you kind of want to have guidelines to be guidelines. If you are thinking about having something like what I mentioned about having less impervious surfaces, I think there could be a look at that as more of a bylaw and out of the hands of the commission from that regard. Of course, they still want to opine on the materials of that particular surface, but that's kind of where the two, does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Second question. Can you explain the 4 feet height to us? Like, where does that number come from? I know it's for historic structures.
Yes.
If there's a homeowner that says, no, I actually want to raise it to the full FEMA height, can they do that?
They absolutely can. So when we were going through the review process with our consultants, I'm gonna try to go to it real quick. 4 foot was the general this is what we would recommend. This is kind of down the middle road, if you will. Again, all about moderation and trying to retain some sort of streetscapes, trying to uniformity, if you will. That's kind of where that came from. And the 4 foot is really the medium. I will tell you, yes, they will approve, and they have had approved elevation higher, and an elevation that FEMA would have rather have them be in those particular areas. Case in point, there was a 1920s little cute cottage out on Mattocket Harbor, right at the end of Warren's Landing. They could, and they not only did they elevate this structure, they moved it back. So they were getting it away from the velocity zone, but they were also elevating it higher. They didn't have to have it at what FEMA requires in the velocity zone. They could have been lower because of what the design guidelines allow for, especially for a contributing historic resource. But the owners and the architect insisted on being the full height. There was no opposition to that. The commission was fine with it. But again, I just want to make it clear, when there are certain mechanisms that need to be done to the structure in order to retain that lower elevation, you're not just, oh, we're just going to elevate a little bit. You also are putting those flood proofing barriers in there, or you're putting vents in for the water to go through. So you are doing some sort of mitigation, but you're not doing the full of what FEMA would require. In my opinion, because we have a lot more contributing resources on the island, in a lot of basically the entire island, it allows for, from a historic perspective, to retain that streetscape a little bit better if a structure, and as well as retaining a higher elevation. One of the first buildings that was adapted very appropriately, in my opinion, was on Union Street, right when we were creating our design guidelines. But they were also doing a very sensitive addition of 1880s Victorian, already with a high elevated basement. So instead of saying, oh, well, I gotta ruin that basement, no, you don't. You just utilize that space within that historic basement where you do your appropriate flood proofing mechanisms, and you elevate your utilities on the inside. So there are ways to do it. Absolutely. And that's what this guidelines help us with.
Okay. And then one last question. I know you can't speak on behalf of HTC, but as town staff and the preservation planner, are there specific areas that CRAC can help HTC, like with incorporating coastal resiliency more than the resilient Nantucket guidelines?
Honestly, I think looking at the surfaces, those impervious surfaces, I think if there was a way for CRAC to assist in that regard, because again, the HTC has authority over materials, and again, it's just as guidelines. There's nothing that really says, yes, there's from a zoning perspective, you do have your ground cover, and that goes into your ground cover, but having an impervious calculation and trying to limit the amount of hardscaping, I think would be helpful. And what that looks like, I think is a conversation that maybe the two could work together.
Okay.
And
also,
again,
sorry, I have one more.
Oh yeah.
Are there any like educational materials too? Obviously there's Resilient Nantucket, but like more of that's digestible that you could give to people coming in that have historic structures in the flood zones, and they need more information, kind of like bite size.
Well, I mean, our Resilient Nantucket guidelines are very, in my opinion, are digestible. There are photos, there are diagrams to actually show what we're talking about when we're elevating a structure. So that document within itself is a great source. And I do have what I call a primer on the town's website through the Resilient Nantucket page that talks about when the HDC adopted these design guidelines, what a contributing structure means, all that kind of stuff. It's about 2 pages long is what I've sent out to all the architects and engineers to kind of get them to understand what we're looking at. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And
Thanks.
again, Mr. Chair, I just want to, I guess, end this with, this is from a staff and what we have on the books perspective. Of course, if there's anything more specific, I would definitely recommend having the commission or the chair involved. But thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it a lot.
No, it's been incredibly informative. Thank you so much, Holly. Anyone else have comments or questions for Holly? Okay, are there any members of the public that have comments or questions for Holly? All right. Thank you very much, Holly. Thanks for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for
Two
having
great-
me.
Two great presentations in a row. Okay. So we'll move on to new business committee and natural resources department reports from planning board, Concom, Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, Select Board, Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers, and other committee members. Are there any such reports? Okay, hearing none. Nantucket's Coastal Conference
Peter,
is on.
Doug has his hand up.
Okay.
Peter, sorry, I was slow to raise my hand. I had a question for Dave, and I just was curious if you'd heard anything from Megan on if she's making progress on her. She was going to draft some language as a follow-up to our work group meeting, and I know she was aiming to have that done by the end of this month. I just didn't know if you'd heard from her.
I haven't, but I can definitely check in and I
Okay.
can send Leah on an update and
Great.
she can distribute it to everyone.
Perfect. Thanks.
Great.
Okay. Nantucket's Coastal Conference is on June 10th, 2025, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Great Harbor Yacht Club. Just wondering, is anybody planning on attending that? It's essentially going to be our next meeting on that date. And so Leah needs to know if we're going to have a quorum there. I gather from her that she'll just be posting the meeting in case we all show up. Half of us say we're not going to be there, but then we change our minds and then we're there. I'll be there. So then if we have a quorum, then I'll be calling the meeting to order so that we are official, and then I'll be adjourning the meeting after the conference. Go ahead, Doug.
Peter, just a reminder, I think Gary and I are both still off island at that
Okay.
stage. I'll be arriving on the 18th.
Okay.
What were the times again?
The times were 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
But it actually starts at 9:30 or 9:45 will be the keynote speaker. But there'll be breakfast materials and coffee and stuff beforehand. And you don't have to go to the whole conference because it ends around 4:30 or 5. So I know that's a long day. But there's some great talks. I can send you the agenda too.
The
Great.
food alone gets you in the door.
And free lunch.
And
I'll
free
do my
lunch.
best.
Yes.
Oh, on that case, I'll definitely. I'll do my best to attend if you need to know who's coming.
Okay. I think I'll send, because I know that there's quite a few members not here today. So I'll send out an email too.
Okay, any other questions and comments? Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Pete. Just a reminder, if you guys don't know, but we're holding a virtual public meeting tonight on the coastal resilience alternatives for the refuge that NCF and the trustees have been working on. If you need the registration link, let me know. I can email it out to Leah again, but that's tonight at 6 to 7:30. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. So anyone from the public, any comments? Okay. Discussion of upcoming meeting dates and topics. Next meeting is June 10th, as I said, the Coastal Conference. If there is nothing else, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Doug Rose, seconded by Matt Fee. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Jennifer Carberg,
Aye.
David Iverson,
Aye.
Doug Rose,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Liz Phelps,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Okay, Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for making the meeting. Thanks, Vince, for coming.
Thank you.